The silver Shelby cobra let out a strange sound, like an angry roar that suddenly lost its breath in the middle of the winding mountain pass. Ethan Blake tilted his head, feeling every small, unfamiliar vibration in the engine, a sensation that, in nearly 30 years of loving cars, he had never wanted to hear. A thin plume of black smoke began to rise from under the hood, drifting slowly into the fiery golden glow of the sun setting behind the mountain range. "Perfect," he muttered, pulling the brim of his baseball cap lower to hide his all-too-recognizable eyes. The sunglasses and casual clothes were a simple disguise, but for the past 3 days, they had helped him live like a normal person, not a CEO, not the heir to Blake Motors, not a target for reporters, competitors, or shareholders. But now, the only thing he was a man stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service, no gas station, and no one to recognize his name on the patents of hundreds of modern car models. Not far from where he stood, a faded sign swayed in the wind, Collins Auto Repair. Honest work at honest prices. The last 3 words felt like a message from an older world, where things weren't measured by stocks or market share, but by reputation and a pair of hands. He closed the hood, grabbed his small travel bag, and started walking. The creaky garage door was slightly ajar, revealing a dim, cramped, but strangely warm space inside. The sets of tools hanging on the walls reminded him of the old days as a boy, following his father to races before he realized his father wasn't the hero he had once thought. A metallic clank rang out, followed by a raspy but firm voice, almost closing time. "But you look like you need help." The man was Harry Collins, silver-haired, with suntanned skin and oil-stained overalls. But in his eyes, there was a glimmer of something Ethan couldn't describe, perhaps the tranquility of a man who had lived long enough to know that all storms eventually pass. "A Shelby Cobra, an original 66. Ethan replied. "I restored it myself." Harry raised an eyebrow, his gaze shifting from suspicion to appreciation. "It's not every day someone brings a piece of history into the middle of this town." The name Blake almost escaped Ethan's lips, but he stopped himself. "I'm Ethan. Just Ethan." And in that moment, a seasoned old man living a slow life with old cars, and a CEO running from his own name stepped into the vortex of an encounter that would change everything. The girl at the back of the workshop hadn't looked up yet. Her black hair was tied in a neat bun. She wore paint-stained jeans and held a thick sketchbook in her hands. She was like a vibrant ink blot in a space steeped in nostalgia. "That's my granddaughter, Lila," Harry said, always sketching something, probably rebuilding the world in her head. The girl only looked at him for a brief second, long enough for Ethan to realize her gaze was unusual. It held something of a person who had seen things the world didn't believe were real. Just like the genius engineers he had met, but usually only in the reverent boardrooms of the corporate headquarters. "Hi," she said softly, then bent down to continue drawing. Just one word. But for Ethan Blake, a man so accustomed to flattery and phony handshakes, it was the most genuine sound he had heard in years. And he had no idea that this very greeting would lead him on a journey of truth, redemption, rebirth, and inventions powerful enough to rewrite the future of an entire industry. The next morning, sunlight filtering through the thin curtain of his temporary rented room woke Ethan. On the bedside table, the sketchbook Lila had forgotten yesterday was still there, partially closed as if whispering an untold secret. He planned to return it to the shop right after breakfast. But then, his hand lightly touched the cover. Something compelled him. An intuition that had once helped him recognize the potential of numerous young designers, but had never been this strong. The first page was a landscape sketch, an old car under the shade of a tree, next to a wooden house with a rusty tin roof. The next page was an engine, but not a type he had ever seen. There were no conventional pipes, no traditional gasoline model, but a kind of hybrid structure between electric and hydraulic. Minimalist, yet full of calculation. Ethan frowned. He turned the page. A hand-drawn diagram simulated the entire transmission system, accompanied by detailed notes on biological materials to replace composites. Another page was a diagram of a honeycomb-style chassis design to reduce weight while still enhancing load-bearing capacity. There were even notes on air resistance, fuel efficiency, and an analysis of component recyclability after the vehicle's life cycle. "This isn't just sketching," Ethan murmured. "This is invention." His heart beat faster. Lila, the girl who had been huddled in the corner of the workshop yesterday, was holding the solutions that Blake Motors' multi-million-dollar R&D department had been unable to solve for the past 3 years, and she was doing it with a pencil. He flipped to the last page, an overall design. The car model was unlike any product on the market, compact, with refined lines, a body made of recycled material noted as low cost, easy for mass production, suitable for African and Southeast Asian markets. It wasn't just beautiful, it was practical, deployable, and had a global mindset. Ethan sat up straight, his eyes no longer holding the relaxed look of a vacation, but the sharp alertness of a CEO sensing enormous potential. He turned back to a page with handwritten notes squeezed between the drawings. "Wish I had software to run a simulation. But oh well, paper is enough. Grandpa coughed more today. I have to hide the pharmacy receipts so he won't worry. Rejected for the scholarship a 3rd time. They said, lacking theoretical foundation. I guess so, but if they just looked, why can't they see this would work?" The words were simple, scribbled in places, but they contained a familiar loneliness, the feeling of having something great in your head, but no one believes you, no one bothers to listen. Ethan put the sketchbook down, his mind in turmoil. He had met many people with big ideas, but very few possessed such sincerity and intense desire. Lila didn't just want to succeed, she wanted to save her grandfather. And she believed in what she drew, even without ever being recognized. A knock echoed at the door. Ethan went to open it. It was Harry, holding a hot cup of coffee and a tool bag. "The parts have arrived," he said. "An old friend of mine in Milan sent them over this morning." Ethan was stunned, not because of the delivery speed, But because this old man had been up since who knows when, making calls, handling everything, all to help a stranger. "Shall we get started?" Harry smiled, offering him the cup of coffee. "Black, no sugar. I figured you were that type." Ethan smiled back, but inside him, something had begun to shift. What started as an accidental vacation had now turned into a clear mission. Get to know that girl. Protect what she is creating. And this time, if something great is born, it will not be stolen again. The morning passed in a light atmosphere that Ethan hadn't experienced in a long time. No calls, no sales analysis charts, no meetings with shareholders, only the smell of gasoline and oil, the sound of tools clinking against metal, and the way Harry Collins worked and explained things, as if every nut and bolt had its own story. As the Shelby Cobra was being lifted, Ethan wandered into the workshop. He told Harry he just wanted to look around, but he was really trying to understand more about the person who was slowly becoming an obsessive mystery. In the far corner of the garage was a small office, the door ajar, unlocked. On the desk was a stack of handwritten invoices, pay after harvest, split into 3 installments. No charge, returning a favor. Ethan read them and felt as if he'd been gently punched in the chest. At Blake Motors, everything was contracts, deadlines, interest rates. Here it was trust. On the wall were black and white photographs. Some showed restored classic cars. A few were family portraits, a young Lila hugging her grandfather at her high school graduation, or in the garage next to an incompletely painted car. But one picture made Ethan stand motionless, a man in a racing suit, standing next to Harry, both of them holding a winner's trophy high, and that man was Ethan's father, Jack Blake. Ethan stepped closer. The photo was faded, but it was unmistakable. His father's arm was around Harry's shoulder, his radiant expression showing not just the joy of victory, but also recognition, a kind of camaraderie that couldn't be faked. Harry had come up behind him without him noticing. "Indianapolis, 1976, he said, his voice slow. "One of the most glorious days of my life." Ethan turned around, trying to hide his confusion. "You were a race team engineer, lead technician." Harry nodded. "Your father. He and I developed a new fuel injection system together. The idea was mine. Jack turned it into that trophy." Ethan clenched his hand slightly. My father never told me about you." Harry let out a laugh, but it was humorless. "I'm not surprised. When I applied for an official job at Blake Motors, bringing the complete improved designs with me, he received me in a glass office. At that moment, I thought I was going to be recognized." Ethan swallowed hard. "And then what?" He told me. "Your idea is interesting, but it's not ready. We need someone with credentials to develop it more professionally." I came back here. 6 months later, that system appeared on Blake Motors' new race car. There were some minor changes on paper, but I knew. It was mine. Ethan was speechless. For all these years, he had believed Blake Motors grew strong thanks to his father's talent. But standing before this man with his grease-stained hands and relentless eyes, he started to feel everything shake. "You didn't sue?" Ethan asked. Harry shrugged, his eyes gazing into the distance. "My wife was battling cancer at the time. I had a young daughter. I could have sued and let them wither away in fear, or I could keep my family and my dignity. I chose the latter." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He felt ashamed, not just for his father, but for himself, for having once thought that someone like Harry, living in a small workshop, fixing cars for poor people, was left behind. "You never wanted fame?" Ethan asked, almost in a whisper. Harry looked at him, his smile weary but sincere. "I used to think so. But then I watched my granddaughter grow up, drawing the things I once dreamed of. And I understood I don't need the whole world to know my name. As long as I leave something behind for someone I believe in." Ethan left the office, his head heavy. Lila was outside in the yard, cleaning the windshield of an old truck. She didn't know that both the future and the past of her family had been stopped in their tracks by the very name Ethan carried. And from that moment, Ethan knew he was no longer just passing through this town. He had stepped into a web of memories, responsibility, and a debt that had never been paid. The afternoon settled slowly over the town, painting the corrugated tin roof of the Collins garage with a pale orange light. Ethan returned to his rented room, his mind reeling with the truth. His father had built an entire empire on the shoulders of a man like Harry and had never looked back. He looked at Lila's sketchbook, still lying on the table, and understood that he no longer had the right to remain silent. Silence was what had condemned Harry to obscurity for 50 years. He would not be complicit in it for a second longer. Just then, a knock came at the door. Lila. She stood on the porch, her gaze no longer distant like the day before, but sharp and resolute. In her hand was a car key and a question with no preamble. "You looked at my sketchbook, didn't you?" Ethan nodded, not looking away. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "It doesn't matter," she interrupted. "They're just some random drawings. I came to get them back." She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room, quickly spotting a corner of a page sticking out from under the pillow. She bent down, silently gathering the sheets as if picking up pieces of her life that someone had pried into. "Lila," Ethan said in a low voice. "I'm not just Ethan. My name is Ethan Blake. Blake Motors." The air in the room seemed to thicken. She stood motionless for a few seconds, then turned to face him. The expression on her face changed from stunned to mocking. "So this is some kind of special recruitment drive? A CEO playing poor, sneaking into town to hunt for talent? It's not like that." Ethan took a step forward, then stopped, maintaining his distance. "I didn't come here for you. My car really did break down. But when I saw your designs, I knew I couldn't ignore them. And now you want to buy them? No. I want you to work for me." The silence stretched. Lila held her head high, her gaze as sharp as a knife. "I don't need a handout," she said. And I certainly don't need someone to recruit me to draw things they'll turn into a product and then slap someone else's name on. Ethan sighed. He walked over to the table and opened his laptop. I want you to see this. On the screen was the latest hybrid design prototype that the Blake Motors R&D team had spent 3 years and nearly $50 million to develop. A complex, multi-layered system. This is our technology, he said. And this. He opened her sketchbook to the page with the hand-drawn hybrid engine system. Is yours. 30% lighter. 20% more efficient, and 3 times simpler to mass produce. You did this alone, with a pencil and paper. Lila stepped forward, looking at the 2 designs. Without a word, she could see what Ethan was saying was true. But instead of pride, her eyes reddened. And then, you'll take this sketchbook back to the city, give it to your engineers, and I'll read another polite rejection letter, just like the last 3 times I applied for a scholarship at your company. Ethan was stunned. The name Collins might have been blacklisted. She continued, her voice growing quieter. Or maybe no one even bothered to read my submission. I don't have enough academic background. Didn't go to MIT. No mentors. Just an old man with a bad back and an old workshop. Ethan lowered his eyes. I didn't know. I honestly didn't know. But you do now. Lila looked straight at him. So, I'll ask again, what are you going to do with this truth? Ethan raised his head, for the first time in his life feeling like someone had seen right through him to his core. I'm going to fix the past, he said, and build a future where people like you are recognized under your own name. A glimmer of light flickered in Lila's eyes, faint, fragile, like an ember left in the ashes. What about my grandpa? She asked abruptly. Ethan blinked. I'm not going anywhere if it means leaving him behind. He smiled a smile that wasn't a CEO's, but that of someone who knew what loneliness felt like. Then we'll find a way for him to come with us. Lila clutched the sketchbook to her chest and took a step back. I don't know if you're telling the truth, but I want to believe you. Ethan nodded. I'll make you believe. Not with words, with actions. A moment of silence. Outside, the sky was turning purple. The hoot of an owl echoed from somewhere, and in that small room between a person who had lived in the shadows and a person stepping out from his own father's shadow, something had just begun to shift. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep a wink. He sat in the dim yellow light of the rented room, Lila's sketchbook resting on his lap, open to the middle where the hybrid engine design was drawn with a slightly trembling hand, perhaps from a late night or from long-term fatigue. A notification on his phone screen made his blood run cold. Unusual server activity detected. Location trace outskirts of Wilmont Town. High risk of industrial breach. Immediately, a second message arrived. Martin Chin's car spotted, parked across from Blake Motel, arrived 20 mins ago. Ethan gripped his phone, a fire burning in his gut. Martin Chin, a name all too familiar in the high-tech engineering world. CEO of Tech Drive, a direct competitor to Blake Motors in the electric and hybrid vehicle development sector. Martin was famous not for creation, but for hunting and appropriation. Small-time talents, technologies not yet patented, they had all been easy prey for him. Ethan quickly stuffed the sketchbook into his bag and started for the door, when a knock rang out. The man standing at the door wore a finely tailored grey suit, polished leather shoes, and a smile as thin as a razor's edge. "Ethan Blake," he said, his gaze sweeping past Ethan's shoulder into the room. "I thought you'd be vacationing on some beach. I didn't expect you to choose a place so quaint." Ethan didn't move. "Martin, you don't mind if I come in, do you? I just want to have a little chat about a certain young talent in this town. Seems very promising." His voice was gentle, polite, but his eyes held a predatory glint, the kind of look that had made dozens of young inventors give up their ownership rights in exchange for a little protection. Ethan stood blocking the doorway. "I don't think she's interested in talking to you." "Oh, her." Martin chuckled softly. "I haven't mentioned anyone." A moment of silence, like a taut string between two forces. Ethan spoke slowly, his voice deepening. "She's the only person I've seen in years who could completely change this industry." Martin raised an eyebrow, as if a rumor had just been confirmed. "Then I suppose you plan to recruit her, or hide her away in a small room until a contract is signed." "Not like you," Ethan replied curtly. Martin laughed, this time not hiding his coldness. "Ethan, I knew your father. I also know how Blake Motors operates. Trust me, no one holds on to anything for long if they don't know how to protect it." He held out a black business card. On the back was a private phone number and a short line: "We pay double, and we don't ask too many questions." As Martin turned to leave, Ethan closed the door. He took a deep breath. He knew what would happen next. Martin wouldn't stop at a business card. He would use every means to dig up information, even breaking in, if necessary. Just then, a whisper came from the bathroom. Who was that Lila? She had hidden in there as soon as she heard the knock, just as Ethan had instructed. Ethan opened the door, his face grim. "We're out of time. He knows, and he won't stop. You're saying he'll take the designs?" Lila clutched the sketchbook to her chest. "Not just take them. He'll steal the credit, erase any trace of you, and put a different brand on every line you've drawn." Lila stood motionless. Her lips were pressed together, her eyes staring into the darkness outside the window where the headlights of Martin's car had just disappeared around a bend. "What do we do?" she asked. Ethan answered quickly. "Pack. You and Harry have to leave here tonight." "No," she interrupted. "If you're planning to leave my grandpa behind, I'm not going anywhere." Ethan nodded. "Not arguing. I'll go with you. Explain everything. But from now on, we can't stay in one place for too long." Lila looked at him, her eyes no longer filled with doubt, but with a clear transformation. Trust was being planted, but it was still fragile. "Then let's get started," she said. And so they began the first retreat, not to run away, but to protect what was most worth keeping, an idea no one yet believed in, but one with the power to change the future. That night, As the town sank into silence, Lila's old Honda quietly rolled back to the Collins garage. The yellow light from the peeling sign was still on. Harry wasn't asleep. "We can't just leave," Lila said, her eyes fixed on that light. "We have to tell him." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. It was time, not just for what Lila had created, but for the man inside that workshop, the man his father owed more than just a thank you. The iron door creaked open. Harry was wiping his hands, his overalls still stained with oil. "Thought you two had disappeared," he said, his voice tinged with surprise. "Car trouble again?" "No, Grandpa," Lila replied, walking straight inside. "We came to talk. About the past." Ethan followed, standing beside her, a silent confirmation. Harry looked at them both, his gaze growing wary. "What's going on?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Do you remember?" Indianapolis, 1976. Harry froze. The rag in his hand dropped to the floor, landing on a fresh patch of oil. The space suddenly seemed to shrink, all surrounding sounds becoming distant. "How did you know about that?" he asked slowly. Ethan pulled out his phone and opened the picture he had taken of the photo in the workshop office, the photo of Jack Blake and Harry holding the winner's trophy together. "My father never told me about you, but this picture and the designs you once made, it says enough." Harry closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his eyes weren't angry, just deeply tired, the weariness of a man who had carried the weight of silence for half a lifetime. "You designed the fuel injection system that helped my father win that race," Ethan continued. "And then you were pushed out of the company, your name erased, and threatened if you sought justice." Lila turned to Harry, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. "Is that true, Grandpa?" Harry sank onto the wooden chair by his desk, his hands clasped together. He was silent for a very long time, so long that Ethan thought he might not say anything at all. Then, in a voice as hoarse as wind sweeping over a forgotten mountain range, he began, "After Indianapolis, I thought I'd be called back to work. Jack seemed very interested. I brought along all the designs, not just the fuel injection system, but also some ideas for an exhaust cooling system. But then he told me, 'Good ideas, Harry, but the company needs people with degrees, with professional credentials.'" He gave a hollow laugh. "I was a mechanic. I learned from practice, not from books. So I came back. 6 months later, Blake Motors launched a new model with my system. A few details were changed, enough to get around the law." "Did you sue?" Ethan asked softly. "I did. I hired a lawyer, filed a case. But then I received a threatening letter. If I continued, they would countersue, accuse me of slander and theft of internal documents. At the time, my wife had just been hospitalized, and my daughter needed to pay her tuition. I could choose to fight, or choose to survive." Harry bowed his head, his shoulders trembling slightly. "You never told me this," Lila said, her voice choked with emotion. "Because I didn't want you to carry that resentment," he replied. I didn't want you to think the world was full of injustice." Ethan sat down opposite him. His voice was low, but resolute. "But the truth is still the truth. My father was wrong, and my company has benefited from that mistake for 50 years. Now it's time to fix it." Harry looked up, seeing Ethan not as a CEO, not as Jack Blake's son, but as a man trying to step out of his family's shadow. "I don't need money," Harry said. "I don't need fame. I've lived just fine all these years without them." Ethan nodded. "I understand. But you deserve to be recognized, not because you need it, but because the people who come after you need to see that justice still exists." Lila squeezed his hand. "And I need to see it too, to know that what I'm doing won't be taken away again." Harry looked at the two young people before him, his eyes seeming to brighten in the dim light of the old garage. A slow, heavy, but decisive nod. Then, "Let's begin, before it's too late." The garage grew quiet late at night, like an abandoned chapel, with only the ticking of the wall clock and the faint sound of wind seeping through the rusty rolling door. In the pale yellow light, Ethan opened his leather briefcase, something he always carried as an inseparable part of his CEO persona. From within, he took out 2 pre-printed contracts. One was for Harry, confirming his intellectual property rights to the fuel injection system used in the Blake car series from 1977 to the present. The other was an offer of employment for Lila as the head of sustainable engine design at the main headquarters, with a compensation package far exceeding that of any new engineer ever hired. Harry pushed the contract back toward Ethan. "I told you I don't need money. You don't have to do this." Ethan didn't rush his reply. He looked directly into the eyes that had endured too much, then said gently, "It's not because you need it. It's because I need to do what's right. And because Lila deserves to grow up in a world where the truth is no longer hidden." Lila was silent for a long moment, then picked up the second contract. Her eyes scanned every clause: no lifetime non-compete, co-creation ownership rights, the freedom to retain her name on all inventions developed from the original design. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I don't have to, but I must," Ethan replied. "I can't change the past, but I can start over with you, with a technology that Blake Motors never dared to dream of." She looked at him, her eyes a mix of astonishment and doubt. "Are you sure if I sign this you might have to face your entire board of directors, lose controlling shares? Is it worth it?" Ethan gave a slight smile, a rare, non-commercial smile. "Doing the right thing doesn't require a cost-benefit analysis," he replied. "And honestly, ever since my father stole Mr. Harry's work, Blake Motors has never been a real company. I don't want to continue a stolen legacy." A moment of silence. Then Lila slowly placed her hand on the contract. "Then let's add one more condition," she said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "I'm not going anywhere without my grandpa," she said clearly. "I'll work for you, but I'll still need to be in this town part-time, so he has someone with him." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Agreed. And I'll do more than that." He turned his laptop screen. displaying a preliminary sketch, the Collins Technology Center, a space integrating a garage, a design lab, and a vocational academy for young people passionate about engineering. We will build this in this town, and Mr. Harry will be an honorary technical advisor, so he can teach what's not in the textbooks: feeling with your hands, listening to machines with your heart. Harry looked up, and for the first time in the conversation, his voice caught. You're really going to do that?" Ethan nodded. "I can't fix my father, but I can listen to you from now on." Lila was silent. She looked at the model of the center on the screen, modern, yet retaining the rustic lines of the old garage. Then she looked at Ethan and said slowly, "Then I'll sign." When the pen touched the paper, it wasn't just a contract being signed, it was a new chapter being opened, a promise not just between people, but between a forgotten generation and a newly awakened one. Ethan stood up and extended his hand. "Thank you, Lila." She shook his hand, squeezing it lightly. "We haven't won yet, but at least, this time, I don't have to fight alone." The wind outside blew stronger, as if pushing open the door of time, propelling all three of them toward a future where the truth would no longer be buried under the dust of fame or power. The sound of an unfamiliar car engine outside the garage near midnight made all three of them in the workshop freeze. Harry walked to the window, pulling back the curtain to look out. A sleek black luxury car was parked just across the street, its engine still running. A figure was getting out of the driver's seat, tall, with a neat build, wearing a knee-length overcoat. Harry turned back, his eyes dark. Not from this town. Ethan pulled out his phone. A message had just arrived from his private security team. "Martin Chin spotted at garage address, approaching from rear entrance. Possible illegal access attempt." Ethan's breath caught. His eyes filled with determination. "We have to get out of here, right now." "Are you sure it's him?" Lila asked, her hand instinctively clutching her sketchbook. "There's no doubt." Ethan nodded. He didn't come to negotiate. He came to steal. Harry walked to the tool rack, pulled a hidden drawer from under the bench, and took out a small silver hard drive. A digital scan of the girl's entire sketchbook. He said, handing it to Ethan. "I made it after the second time Lila was rejected for the scholarship, just in case the world was one day willing to listen." Ethan tucked the hard drive inside his jacket. "Good. Now we need a diversion." Just then, the sound of the metal door at the back of the workshop rang out, a click. Someone was trying to pick the lock. Harry whispered, "The old exit on the right side. It leads to the tire yard behind the garage. We'll use that." No one objected. They each knew that if they stayed, what they would lose wasn't just the drawings, but the first chance at fairness in decades. Lila grabbed a small handbag and a spare USB drive she had prepared, while Ethan quickly locked his laptop and stuffed it into his backpack. Harry turned off all the workshop lights, leaving the room plunged into darkness, with only the sound of wind whistling through the iron gaps and the footsteps of someone slowly approaching from behind. The side door opened quietly. The three of them silently crossed the empty lot behind the garage where old tires were piled up like extinguished blocks of coal. Lila led the way, the light from her small handheld flashlight just enough to illuminate the path without being conspicuous. Lila's car was parked at the end of the alley. As the three of them rushed inside, Ethan looked back one last time. The lights inside the garage were now on. A figure was rummaging through the drawing table and file racks. "Where are we going?" Lila asked, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. Ethan quickly gestured the gas station to the north. "There's a small motel. I've already booked a room. My security will meet us there." As the car sped past the last intersection, the town faded behind them. Lila glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the garage lights still on, like a small burn mark in the darkness, a place that was once a home, now a target of attack. Harry sat in the back, his rough hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, kid. As long as we have the drawings, we still have everything," Ethan whispered, "and I won't let Martin Chin get his hands on any of it." A few hours later, in a small roadside motel room, the three of them sat around a table. Ethan laid out a copy of the contract, the hard drive, and the documents he had prepared to reveal the truth. Lila looked at him, and for the first time, it seemed the burden she had carried for so long opened up into a sincere question. "Are you really going to make this public? The part about your father stealing the patent, the part about Blake Motors threatening to sue my grandpa?" Ethan nodded without a trace of hesitation. The board might push back. The shareholders might be furious. "But if I stay silent, I'll become exactly like my father. And that's something I can't forgive." Harry said softly, "You're daring to do what your father didn't. That's the difference." Lila looked at them both, then nodded. "Then, tomorrow morning, we'll start over, from the very land they once wanted to forget." Ethan smiled. "Not just start over, but start right." And in that temporary motel room in the quiet suburbs, three people, an old man who had been forgotten, a girl who had never been heard, and a CEO bearing the weight of righting a wrong, officially entered the point of no return, demanding justice, not with shouts, but with public disclosure, evidence, and undeniable action. 4 days later, the town of Wilmont woke up to an unprecedented event, a public press conference organized by Blake Motors at the old high school auditorium. The sign, Wilmont High School, Est, 1952, suddenly gleamed under the stage lights, as the entire area was transformed into a temporary modern auditorium. Folding chairs were replaced with velvet upholstered ones, and a professional sound and lighting system had been installed overnight. Luxury cars with out-of-state plates filled the parking lot. Journalists, investors, and familiar faces from the auto industry were all present. Harry stood backstage, his suit neat but still giving off a feeling of being out of place. Lila stood beside him in a dark blue dress, simple yet elegant, her hand gripping his so tightly the knuckles turned white. "I didn't think you would come," she whispered. Harry exhaled, his eyes on the stage where the words "honoring truth, unlocking the future" were projected on a large LED screen. "I didn't think so either," he replied softly. "But then I thought, if I don't stand up there today, who will teach the kids that truth isn't meant to be buried?" When the clock struck 2 p.m., the stage lights dimmed for a few seconds before flaring back to life, focused on the man walking to the center of the stage. Ethan Blake, no longer the man in the beat-up silver sports car, or the stranger hiding behind a baseball cap. He wore a charcoal grey suit with a navy blue tie as polished as a leader, but his eyes carried something no CEO easily possesses: humility learned from silence and mistakes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan's voice began, echoing through the auditorium, "I am here today not to talk about the future of a company, but to correct the past of a person, my own." All eyes were on him. He clicked the remote. The old photograph appeared on the screen: Jack Blake and Harry Collins holding the Indianapolis 1976 trophy high. "Everyone knows the man on the left, Jack Blake, my father. But today, I want you to know the man on the right, Harry Collins, the man who created the fuel injection system that won that race." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed relentlessly. "Mr. Harry." Ethan turned, his voice catching. Should have been recognized 50 years ago. But he was silenced. His name was erased. He was threatened. And because of the cowardice of those who came before me, Blake Motors grew strong on the pain he never revealed. Everyone turned to the front row, where Harry was sitting. That aged face suddenly became the center of the room. "From this day forward," Ethan continued, "Blake Motors officially recognizes Mr. Harry Collins as the original inventor of the Collins fuel injection system, and will proceed to pay all royalties that should have belonged to him for the past several decades." Thunderous applause erupted. Some reporters stopped taking notes and simply clapped. Harry stood up, gave a slight nod, and said nothing, but his eyes shone with an emotion Lila had never seen relief. But the announcement didn't stop there. Ethan switched to the second slide, Lila's drawings, now rendered into magnificent 3D models. "And talent," he said, "always finds a way to live on through the next generation. The designs you are seeing are by Lila Collins, Mr. Harry's granddaughter." Whispers arose. A few people muttered, "Really? She's only 23. Didn't go to any college." Ethan smiled. "I spent millions of dollars for my team of engineers to solve a problem for 3 years. And she did it in 3 weeks, with a pencil." The spotlight moved to Lila. She stood up, still holding her grandfather's hand, her eyes hesitant. But then, as Ethan extended his hand from the stage, she walked up, not to be recognized, but to step out of the shadows. "Introducing," Ethan announced, "the head of next-generation sustainable systems for Blake Motors, Lila Collins." The entire auditorium rose to its feet in a standing ovation. In that applause, there was remorse, respect, and hope. An hour later, in a backstage room, Lila stood alone, looking out at the school's old sports field where she used to sit and draw under a tree when the whole town thought of her as just that unusual girl. Ethan walked up beside her. "You left them speechless." "No." Lila shook her head. "They've only just started listening." He nodded slowly. "And I have only just started to understand what it means to lead." She smiled faintly. "You think you can change an entire industry with a few designs and an apology?" Ethan looked at her seriously. "No, but I think you can." And so, the truth was revealed, not with a roar of anger, but with a quiet nod between two generations. One who had been forgotten, one who had been rejected, and one who had been silent now knew how to speak up. 6 months after the earth-shaking announcement, the town of Wilmont was no longer a faded name on the state map. Collins Auto Repair was still in its old location, but the facade had been freshly painted, the sign replaced with simple but elegant metal lettering, Collins Innovation Center, a division of Blake Motors. Below it, Harry's old motto remained, preserved intact. As a reminder, honest work at honest prices. No one wanted to change that line, because that very philosophy, once considered outdated, had now become the core of the transformation. Inside the garage, the change was even more dramatic. Half of it was still a mechanical workshop, hydraulic lifts, tool racks, the smell of grease, all kept as they were. But the other half was newly built with glass, a design studio with digital sketch tables, 3D printers, experimental models, and a simulation rig that universities dreamed of. In this space, Lila sat at a high table, adjusting the design for the first concept car, named the Collins One, a hybrid model with a body made from recycled materials and the transmission system she had invented in her sketchbook years ago. On the other side of the glass, Harry was guiding 3 high school students as they dismantled an old truck engine. He still wore his dark blue coveralls, but now embroidered on his chest was a new line, Instructor, Senior Mechanical Division. Understanding a machine, he was explaining, is learning a language without words. It never lies. Only the listener is not patient enough to hear it. The kids nodded, taking notes, one even recording a TikTok video. But their eyes were bright, and Harry knew that was what mattered most. Outside, test cars bearing the Blake Motors logo circled a small, temporarily constructed test track. Ethan stepped out of one of them, his shirt sleeves rolled up, holding a hot cup of coffee. "Lila," he called out as he saw her emerge from the studio. "The car is heavy on the rear axle," she said immediately upon seeing his expression. "Shaving 3 kilograms off the suspension system will solve it. On Sunday afternoon." Sunlight slanted across the tin roof of the Collins workshop, casting a coppery red hue on everything from the smell of oil in the air to the old photos hanging on the wall. In the small office, Harry Collins sat at his desk, a simple document in front of him, but perhaps the most important paper of his life. Ethan gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "This is the official recognition from the United States Patent Office," he said. Your name will be recorded as the original inventor of the Collins fuel injection system, effective from 1976, and the compensation has been transferred to your account." Harry didn't rush to open the paper. He looked at it as if he were looking back at his entire life, the days in the racing pits, the sleepless nights hand-drawing diagrams on oil paper, the times he swallowed his bitterness when rejected. "You know," he said softly, "if I had received this paper 50 years ago, my life probably would have taken a different turn." Ethan remained silent. Harry opened the paper, read every line carefully, then folded it as meticulously as one would fold an old love letter. "But now it's just a piece of paper." He smiled faintly. "Justice is precious, but more importantly is what we do with it for tomorrow." That evening, the three of them unveiled the large tarp at the back of the garage, what Harry called his after-hours secret. As the tarp fell to the floor, Lila let out a soft gasp. Before them was a unique electric motorcycle, the front rounded like a vintage bike, the body sleek with flowing lines, in a shimmering pearlescent green. "The Apprentice," Harry said, his eyes twinkling. "I built it from your secondary drawings, made a few adjustments to the torque axle, and added a coffee holder." Lila laughed, walking over, her hand stroking the body of the bike as if touching a story retold in metal. "When did you learn to use CAD?" "Just spied on you." He chuckled. "The welding part is still done by hand. I'm old, but I still have enough feel to sense the metal breathe." Ethan nodded. "And I used to think leadership was about making decisions. But now I understand sometimes leadership is about knowing when to sit down and learn all over again." They both looked out at the garage where Harry was guiding the kids as they took apart a gear, not with a PowerPoint lecture, but by taking their hands and asking, "Hear that sound? That's the machine talking to you." A photo from that day was hung on the garage wall, the three of them standing together, Harry, Ethan, and Lila. Behind them, a blackboard had a sentence written in white chalk: "Understand the past, design the future." In the final voiceover, the scene slowly transitions through a series of vignettes, Lila holding the hand of a little girl, drawing an engine with crayons. Harry adjusting a screwdriver for a clumsy student. Ethan test driving the Collins. One on the test track, wind blowing through his hair. No longer a cold CEO, but a man who knows freedom begins with letting go of a wrongful past. I used to think a strong company was one that never admitted its mistakes. But I was wrong. A strong company is one that dares to make things right, no matter how late. I used to believe that innovation came from the boardroom, but then I met a girl and an old man in a town no one remembered, and they showed me true innovation begins with belief. From a scribbled drawing, from a simple greeting, from someone who was once left behind, and from the most unexpected of places. If you are holding an idea that no one believes in, don't throw it away. Hold on to it, because maybe the only thing it's missing is someone who dares to believe in you. And if you are in a position to give an opportunity, don't wait for them to come knocking. Go find them, look them in the eye, and ask a simple question: would you like to try to begin?